Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. As people are joining, please add your name, your organization in the chat, and we'll get started here in about 10 or 15 seconds or so. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I am going to quickly just start putting some things in the chat, like our agenda and whatnot, and get us started. Thank you, Michelle, and get us started. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. We are so excited for everyone to be here today for our monthly food system advocacy community call. I wanted to just quickly run through some things that are upcoming here at the Food Council, just to make sure they're on everyone's radar, and as well we'll drop in the events page so that all of them come at once as well. Just to highlight, on July 10th, we'll be having our next food security call. So that's not next Monday, but the Monday following. The day after that, on July 11th, we'll be having our Equitable Land Access Working Group call, the Tuesday, the 11th. And then also all in the same week, on July 13th, we will be having what we're calling a small food business information session, And that session, I want to provide a little more information about. The small food business owners and managers, please join the Montgomery County Food Council for a virtual information session to help you grow your successful food business here in Montgomery County. We will learn from the county's Small Business Center on the most recent financing opportunities, resources, technical assistance services, and other opportunities for Montgomery County businesses. We're really excited to be able to host this call and are looking for as many people as possible to join. And that is coming up also in 2 weeks or so. So obviously next week, I'm sure a lot of people are off and enjoying vacation, but the week after that is filled with lots of activities from the Food Council, which we are all really excited about. To get us started, I am going to introduce our first speaker, who is Heather Bruskin. So I'm going to read off a bio that I know is probably embarrassing but it always goes that way, so it will. For more than 12 years, Heather Bruskin, the new director of the Office of Food System Resilience, has been a leader in community-based organizations. Her roles have included financial management, strategic planning, data collection, and analysis. She has been actively involved in engaging residents, employees, and volunteers in collaborative and effective program operations. As the former executive director of the Montgomery County Food Council, Ms. Bruskin led the county's primary food system advocacy nonprofit organization through a significant expansion. Ms. Bruskin serves in leadership roles with numerous local and regional food systems and nonprofit organizations, including currently as the elected co-chair of the Maryland Food System Resiliency Council, as an appointed member of the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, Food and Agriculture Regional Committee. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Heather. Thank you.
Wow, Jack, thank you. Yep, you're right. It was embarrassing, but I appreciate it very much, the chance to be here with all of you and get to talk a little bit about some of the exciting food work that is happening in FY24, which starts on July 1st in the county government. So I think that most of the folks who are here have probably seen some components of this presentation before. So apologies for any repetition, but hopefully there is opportunity just to share a little bit about what the new Office of Food Systems Resilience is striving to work on in partnership with both government agencies at the county, state, and federal levels, but also most importantly in partnership with our community leaders and experts, many of whom are here today. So I am going to try my best to share my screen here. I think I have the ability to do that.
Yeah, I made you a co-host, Heather.
Okay. My technical challenges have carried with me over into the government sector. So thanks everybody. But can you see that? Yes, okay, cool, great. So I think I have just about 10 to 15 minutes today, and I will go through this all quickly. Of course, I'll share the slides afterward in case anybody wants to take a closer look. And my colleague at County Council, Tara Clemons Johnson, is also going to share information more specifically about some of the food work that is in the FY24 budget. So I think, some of it I'll touch on and then leave it to Tara to go into greater depth. But the Office of Food Systems Resilience is really focused on developing and implementing budgetary, regulatory, and operational strategies focused on building equity, resilience, and sustainability in our food system in the county. So I think if you're on this call, you probably have a sense of what food system means, but that is everything that's involved from the production, distribution, consumption, and ultimate waste and hopefully nutrient recovery of our food system as a cycle. And we know that food connects with every single resident every single day, impacts their life one way or another, as well as every single agency in the county government engages with food in one way or another. And so that's a lot of different pieces to connect in terms of everything from policymaking to investment strategies and resource allocation. And just so that we're all on the same page, defining resilience as the capacity of individuals, communities, and the county itself as an institution to withstand and rapidly recover from food system disruptions, stresses, and changes. And so that could come, certainly this is, growing out of COVID response and lessons learned, but these challenges can come from they will come from climate change, from global political unrest, from supply chain disruption. There's lots of threats every single day to how we depend on food, not just on economic affordability access, but also from simply where our food is coming from and how it gets to our plates. So the OFSR was created through County Council legislation in last year. Well, technically it was launched this year when I was hired in February, but it was created through legislation last year by County Council at the request of the county executive, building directly on the recommendations made by the Food Security Task Force, which was a public-private partnership that stewarded over $30 million in community investments in food security during the COVID-19 response. And so I think this is a really meaningful and important opportunity to not just go back to the way things were in 2019, because I think we all saw that there were a lot of ways that we could strengthen our systems to be more prepared for future challenges. So our legislative mandates are pretty robust. I won't read into them here, but this is codified in the bill that created the OFSR, but it primarily is serving both as a liaison within government, but also with partners across the state and region, as well as food system stakeholders throughout Montgomery County. And there's a few specific agencies, particularly Health and Human Services and Emergency Management and Homeland Security, that were specifically designated to partner with, as well as the Office of Agriculture. But really, it's embedded throughout everything the county does, one way or another, whether it's our procurement, or the way that we source food in the food service facilities that the county operates, whether it is the way we have contracts with vendors and community, it's how we invest in and support agriculture. So the OFSR, as we engage in all of our different priorities, will always be looking through 4 key lenses. Equity. Is it truly moving the needle on reducing disparities in racial and demographic related social injustices in our community? Is it systems-based? Are we looking at food from a siloed perspective, which often is how food is approached, or are we looking at it really as an interconnected whole? Innovation is key. Are we bringing creative ideas and best practices from other jurisdictions right here to Montgomery County? And then finally, are we making informed decisions that are data-driven and really looking at not just where are we succeeding in implementation, but where do we have gaps that need to be closed and opportunities to make sure that all residents are benefiting from these initiatives. Here's just a few initial impact goals. None of these will probably be surprises, but really looking at expanding local food production, focusing on infrastructure, transitioning our food security initiatives from the sort of COVID-oriented landscape of the past few years to a long-term initiative in the county, and better preparing us for future crises, both through strategic planning processes, as well as creating communication and coordination mechanisms. And then most importantly, really looking at building economic opportunities in our food system so we can start to get to some of the root causes of some of these significant challenges and inequities in our system. So really here, just quickly looking at the 4 main areas within the county that the OFSR will guide work through those 4 strategic values. Policy, so little p policy, how are we implementing current rules, operating programs, but also big P policy through legislative, regulatory, and other mechanisms that the county leads. Investment, so that can be both dollars through grants, contracts, but also the resources that the county has, whether it's land or infrastructure or other facilities. Collaboration, how are all of our agencies working together so that they're sharing information, kind of know what each other are working on related to food, and then also making sure that we have intentional and comprehensive feedback loops with the community and other partners so that we're learning from the experts in our community, but then also effectively communicating information about resources that are available to the community as well. And then finally, data. I think we all can recognize that there are tremendous gaps in the information that we have about our local food system. And so how is that informing the decisions and the investments that we make? And how is it also allowing us to set goals and tracking our progress, communicating our progress towards those goals, and also assessing the impact towards these issues that we're striving to work for. I think this is something that is obviously not a surprise, but we are going to do a lot of exploring, thoughtful analysis, executing the work, and then most importantly, closing that loop of assessing the outcomes and our progress. Again, we'll share these a little bit later, but just noting that there is already a lot of active things that are going on with the OFSR. It is currently just me, but there will be 2 additional positions that are going to be on staff with a program manager who will be focused on community engagement and policy making partnerships, and then a performance management data analyst who will be primarily focused on identifying all the information that's out there related to food systems in our county, setting goals, communicating and visualizing that data, and tracking our progress. Because I think food data is all over the place, but we're never looking at it from a systems perspective and longitudinally as well. And some of the things that we hope to work on a little bit more intentionally that are on the horizon include closer partnerships with the state, looking at partnerships related to creative financing. A lot of these are things that the Food Council and our partners in the community have already been working on and looking at. But certainly building intentionality across agencies is going to be critically important. And then finally, what do we want to look at in the future? We have our food security plan. We have the childhood hunger strategy. How will those be implemented and rolled out in the long term? And then much more creative ideas that take a lot of research and listening and learning. How do we bring more affordable food retail and accessible food purchasing opportunities? How can we be more creative in partnerships with wholesalers and retailers to create food access opportunities for residents? And just a couple of quick summaries here of what the FY24 budget looks like in terms of food security. There will be additional information that's coming out about this, but as we are on the cusp of the fiscal year, and Tara will talk about this in a minute, but the focus is for the first 2 quarters of FY24, so the remaining 6 months basically of the calendar year 23, is to provide as much continuity of services to community organizations as possible. There have been many years of an evolving Staples program, and there is funding in the budget for that. And the county executive's intention is to keep support to residents in the locations where they're currently being served as consistent as possible while we develop a longer-term strategy for implementation in 2024 and beyond, with our hubs in particular playing a critical role in being a referral point and initial service access point for residents seeking food assistance. As well, there's many organizations who have existing contracts with the county government. And so the Staples program allows for bulk food purchasing and with kind of working through a couple of specific vendors, Capital Area Food Bank and Manna Food Center, to then work in partnership with smaller organizations to allow them to focus on the distribution and also help the dollars stretch a bit further. For the second half of FY24, there will be opportunities for piloting new programs and new approaches to this work, while also working with County Council to pursue additional funding for new strategies when those staples funds run out. Unfortunately, so much of the work that was done during COVID that was food security specific was funded through the federal government. So as our residents are feeling the significant impacts of the end of programs like emergency allotments and SNAP, our local government also is feeling the strain of all of the federal resources that had been available, no longer serving as a resource to fund the programs that our community has been dependent on. And so that really is forcing us to take a thoughtful look at how can we frankly do more with less, knowing that our residents are experiencing levels of food insecurity similar to that of the early days of the pandemic. So how can we make sure that we're looking at what we're doing now, what's working, where are there areas for improvement, and how can we make sure that we're leveraging the unique assets and talents of our constellation of food assistance provider partners in the county. And then in FY25 will be an opportunity for the county executive in his proposed budget in March of 2024 to roll out some broader and newer approaches to how the county will do funding partnerships with the community. And so much more to come on that, but there will be a focus on aligning our partnerships with county providers that are connected to their strengths, their size, their close relationships with different communities, because we know that we have over 120 different organizations doing food security work here in the county, and each one is unique in terms of their abilities and their strengths. And so we want to create a system that is building capacity where it's needed, leaning into existing capacity where it already is, and finding ways to make sure that there are fewer gaps in serving residents and creating investments that are building towards a better future and addressing the root causes of food security much more than point in time resource distributions of food. And that's me. And that's my email address. I would welcome opportunities to connect with all of you. I'm happy to answer questions, but this is just the very beginning of a very long-term strategy to achieve big goals that I know and we all share. So looking forward to the work.
Thank you so much, Heather. I think we have a few minutes for questions specific to Heather and her presentation, but then we also have time on the agenda after Tara's presentation for additional, more general questions for Tara or both speakers. So I am already seeing questions in the chat. I would like to note the appreciation for the logo, which I agree with. That came in the chat, Heather, your logo is admired. So I'm seeing a question from Michael. Michael, would you like to come off mute, or would you like, if not, I can read your question to the group.
Yeah, sure, I could come off mute. Sorry, I'm managing multiple work meetings. Yeah, so quick question about, I was wondering if your office will be interacting with SHA or MCDOT regarding transportation issues that could hinder access to food sources such as food pantries or grocery stores. For example, these will be, say, bus stops where they let off people at narrow sidewalks along dangerous roads. Specifically, I'm thinking about US 29, you have Manna Food Center out there, and I believe Rainbow Community Development Center, and the sidewalks where the BRT is going to be, the dedicated lane, are quite narrow and dangerous. So I was wondering if your office will have any interaction on those matters. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. And I absolutely hope so. I know that I have not had a lot of interaction yet with DOT, but I have had some, and I know that they have already tapped into the expertise of colleagues like Diana Klato-Nigtash, who is on this call from DHHS, in some of the grants that they are working on, because I think there is definite recognition between at DOT between the connections between the work that they do and food access in the community. So I have had literally hundreds of meetings over the past 4 months with many different agencies, because even every agency has, you know, silos within it around how they intersect with food issues. So the early focus has been on developing those relationships, sharing information about what my office is here to do. And I really appreciate that suggestion. And I will note too that the State Highway Administration I see a couple colleagues here from state and regional work, and the Maryland Food System Resiliency Council also is a good mechanism for convening people around these issues at the state level. And that also provides us here in the county with a helpful mechanism for connecting with state level partners. So I guess I would note that some of this work will happen countywide, and some of it will certainly happen in collaboration with state and regional partners as well. And thank you for the logo. Tara, sorry.
No, I'll just say, I'll add to that this might, so not very specific to food, but it kind of speaks to within HHS, and maybe Diana can comment, is Healthy Montgomery, which is like what we call like our local health disparities coalition. And so they actually have a group, and one of their focuses on health and all policies. So there's a number of like the Department of Transportation, Department of Permitting, and things like that actually sit on Healthy Montgomery. And so Healthy Montgomery kind of crosses all of those social determinants, including health and food. So that might be a good group to connect with, that because they would coordinate food, you know, folks with disability. The Commission on Peoples with Disabilities talks about this a lot also. So that is like, if you want to say the convener group, that kind of touches exactly what I said, health and all policies. So that might be a forum to address that also.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. And I will take that with me, because part of, in addition to convening food related groups, a big part of what I'll do, and I serve on Healthy Montgomery's advisory group, is bring those ideas to those discussions as well. And I know Dr. Davis is very committed to, you know, seeing food as a component of health and all policies, which of course there's some agreed.
Thank you. I'll just add that Jack on our team participates in the Coalition for Smarter Growth's Better Buses Coalition. So we're engaged in those conversations as well in terms of transportation and access to food from that end. And we also attend the Healthy Montgomery meetings to help provide that food system perspective. So I'm glad that we are all talking about these collective groups where these different intersections are already happening. Are there any other questions specific to Heather before we move on to Tara? And then, like I mentioned, we will have an opportunity for a more general discussion or Q&A for both speakers. Okay, on that note, I will turn it over to Tara. So I just want to thank Tara. And for those of you that may have watched the budget hearings, I feel like Tara was one of the stars of the show. She was always shepherding folks through the agenda and did a wonderful job. So anyway, I feel like we have a celebrity on our call today in some aspects. But anyway, we really appreciate you taking the time to join us today and to help us further understand the food system impacts to this FY24 budget. So with that, thanks so much, Tara.
Thank you. So happy to be here. And if you have any questions, shoot them towards me. I'll try to answer. But if I don't know the answer, I'll go to my much more esteemed colleagues and ask them. So I have a PowerPoint. I guess I'll just, let's see. Here we go. Is the PowerPoint showing? Okay.
Yep, we can see it. Thanks.
Okay, great. Did it go down? Is it still? Okay, sorry. Well, we'll go from here. So this is, I'm just providing a few slides, just an overview of the FY24 budgeting process that we took this year. The budgeting process, some things are standard every year, and then some things are a little bit different depending on who the council president is and how the that particular council addresses things. So this was the first year of our 11-member council, and I'll just go through the details. So the timeline every year is that the county executive must transmit the recommended operating budget for all of the county government agencies to council by March 15th. Council holds public hearings in April. This year, we had held more than usual. There's usually 2, and there was 4 that occurred this year, and they were all in the evening. People could submit testimony written and also provide it verbally. The committee holds operating budget work sessions throughout April, and then the full work sessions occur in early May. And the council must reconcile all expenditures and revenues across the operating and the capital budgets in mid-May prior to final approval, and budget approved and adopted before the end of May. So our budget was approved on May 18th. So council central staff's approach is when the operating budget comes over March 15th, our work kind of begins. We do our deep dive. Sometimes we ask OMB if they could tell us early, and they never do. So that gives us those next 2 to 3 weeks to really look what was recommended by the CE, including any FY23 budget recommendations or the prior year's fiscal year expenditures or programs that were recommended to close, or if there's any growth, the changes that occurred to them, including any policy changes. From that, we develop recommendations and identify alternative for council members to consider. So that's really looking at the budget overall, getting down to service areas, getting down to programs, receiving updates from the actual programmatic staff on what's happening. And from that, we draft recommendations and help guide the committees as they discuss each of the programs in detail. So the operating budget concepts, so these are all within the charter requirements or Montgomery County Code. Talked about the March 15th budget. We must hold public hearings. The council can add, delete, increase, or decrease any budget appropriation. So the council also may not set a property tax rate greater than the previous year property tax rate unless all council members affirmatively vote to increase the property tax rate, which is kind of new. But you'll see this year, there was actually a vote from 7 to 4, because when it comes to increases, as if the increase is solely related to, if the property tax increase is solely related to support for local schools, that just needs a simple majority vote. So as we saw this year, the majority vote was 7 to 4. Instead of the CE's recommended 10% increase, the county council adopted a 4.7% increase. And again, that vote was 7 to 4. It didn't have to be all of the council members because that was solely for the schools. The council must set guidelines on affordability each year. This year, that was finalized on February 14th, 2023. That was the finalization for the operating budget. The capital budget finalization is usually in December. And that process is where it starts in September. So we'll be starting it in a few months again, where all of the departments are asked to, it's a process. I won't go through it because I don't know the full details. Looking at their finances, looking at providing recommendations, looking at tax revenues. And so all of it is kind of preliminary until we get to December and we get some final numbers from the state. But I think this year, I think they levied the tax increase. It was just, the increase was more, or affordability ceiling was increased by 2.16%, which was the same as last year. So I could give you the number, but that's, I can do that after we get off the call. But each year the council must adopt a balanced budget by June 1st and the fiscal year ends on June 30th. So part of the development of the budget is taking into consideration racial and equity and social justice. So we have a fairly new Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice. I believe it's been around for like 4 to 5 years. And they developed a operating budget equity tool used in FY24 budget development process. So they asked each department a series of questions and how, how they incorporate the racial equity and social justice priorities within budget allocations, existing programs, and proposed programs to eliminate disparities and or improve outcomes for communities of color and low-income communities. So analysts are instructed to incorporate these ratings as part of our analysis and present that information to the county council members. There is a specific work session that occurred to review and discuss how the executive incorporated those racial equity and social justice policies into the FY24 budget process. So particularly with food, OFSR and DHHS, OFSR, because they're a department of their own, provided a racial and equity and social justice, I'm like, say that 5 times fast, review. And so as part of the analysis of that, I did include that in the report. So if you go look at it, that'll be included there. It was a little different than DHHS. And in terms of that, like staff is probably going to make the recommendation is DHHS has several service areas, 6 service areas, like aging and disability, children, youth, and families. This year, they provided a review of the department as a whole, which really isn't helpful when it comes down to the service area. You know, it's helpful to know that DHHS takes an approach of X, Y, and Z. We focus on, but for the purposes of budgeting and looking at it from that perspective, it would be our recommendation is that for next year, that they focus on the service area and that chief or those program staff get together and talk about it, and then they can provide that information. So there can be a better analysis for the council members to think about that as they weigh that into their policy recommendations and changes for the next fiscal year. So the council president's budget approach. So each council president independently decides the budget approach for the year. So this year, the council president is Evan Glass. And last year, the council president was Councilmember Gabe Albornoz. So each of them set the tone or sets the approach for the county council, and it is independently their decision. So this year, this was the approach that Councilmember Glass had the council take, which were all tax-supported increase over FY23 recommended by the executive or a committee were placed on the reconciliation list. Now, this was a change. This was a big change for the council because usually they only include the council tax recommended increases on the reconciliation list. So if you look at reconciliation for the past few years, it's usually only 1 page because those are just the tax supported additions that the council will do. And usually they're mostly within HHS because it's where they want to beef up programmings or they want to support an increase in the amount of food we give in the community. And so because it's more social services stuff. So that was a big change. There was like, oh, okay, this reconciliation list is going to be huge because we're taking all of the council tax supported and the and the council increases on that reconciliation list. So we'll see what happens next year. So items on the list were designated as priority and high priority and one time and or going. That was also a new process this year. So we'll see if that's recommended for next year. Committees were instructed to look for reductions that can free up resources for other priorities. This is a usual practice, but one that the council president included. And then FY24 compensation and benefits were reviewed separately by the GO committee and the full council. So this is a slide really related to what we're talking about. So the FY24 approved budget, these are specific food related funding in DHHS and the Office of Food System Resilience. So Heather really went over all of the details within OFSR, but I'll just note in DHHS, like you mentioned, the food staples program, the recommendation from the county executive was to actually use county general funds at 6.15 million. But the county council kind of had some savings, if you wanted to say, of ARPA funding, and they chose to designate the initial funding or the funding for FY24 to use the ARPA funds. So this was a big decision for the council because there was some discussion they wanted to use it for small businesses. There was some discussion about using it for some other workforce programs, I believe. So it was really a big deal that the whole council committed to supporting food. So I'll just say overall, I think that is indicative of the council's commitment to making sure that protecting food insecurity as much as they can and utilizing ARPA dollars as they try to think about how they transition this from ARPA to county general funding. Service consolidation hubs. It started as an ARPA funded program 2-3 years ago, but last year it was fully funded with county general funds. This year it is county funded again. That amount is $3 million. I included it because of course it started out as food really, but now we know that they're kind of provide more wraparound services like food, diaper services, I believe some level of case management and even referrals to other services. So it's helping to really change the mindset so that, yes, food is like a major thing that they do, but also that it can be a service hub for our community members. The Newcomers and Beneficios initiative, built into their budget, it's about $6 million. It's one-time funding, but it's been one-time funding for 4 years. So you can take that with what you may. The county is supporting that program. But built into their budget, I believe for the first time, is food. And so it's specifically for that community and helping to provide those emergency food supports for the people coming through that program. I just want to highlight there are nonprofits that receive operating support for food security efforts. So some of them are MANA, some of them are specifically called out just because they're big food service providers in the county. And so they, by one way or another, are provided direct support to help assist county residents. And then there are also multiple community grants supporting access to food and food insecurity. I didn't pull those out because there's a number of them, but maybe some of your organizations get some of the small grants that have been renewing year after year after year, because I think the council's old grant process pretty much became defunct once the Office of Grants Management came around, but those grants were maintained. So there are still those grants providing that food access. And then OFSR, like I said, Heather went over the details of her program, so I put the names of them there. And then the Farm to Food Bank is one where where money for the program just sits in DHHS and OFSR. So same program, provides the same service, but the money just sits in both budgets. And then this is just briefly, I thought this would be helpful, is that FY24 is a year that the county executive and the county council supported a number of grants through the office of the grant office. I'll just call it grants office. Can't remember their official name. So the director there is Raphael Murphy. And he did a great presentation, a nonprofit Montgomery, that I'll drop the link into, I believe like in mid-June. But I just wanted to highlight some that could be related to food insecurity, food support for those in communities that nonprofit organizations could apply for. So there's $1.5 million in youth support, $1.2 million in underserved community grants, $1 million in community project fund grants, and $1.5 million in senior support grants. And so this is the grant application timeline, just so you get an idea. Raphael is switching, or they're trying to, I think, just update how they do their process. So for all of the 2024 grants, they will begin in January 1st, 2024 through December 2024. So they'll be on a calendar year. So the funding happened with FY24, but the actual grants timeline will be between January and December. This is a change from last year. And in the years before, sometimes the grants would start in July, some of the times they would start in October, sometimes they would start in like November. It was a weird schedule. And so I think this is the grants office efforts to put everyone in the same schedule. I didn't include it in the narrative here, but also what the county executive and county council did with changing to this new grants timeline, they provided bridge grants for those organizations currently receiving grants. I believe you did have to apply, and hopefully everyone's contract monitor got in touch with them to let them know that they needed to apply. But this was bridge grants to ensure that those nonprofits still got support for funding July through December for those that were renewing and will be put on a different timeline now, with starting in January. So those are all listed on the grants website. So just wanted to highlight that. And that's really the end of my presentation, and I can take any questions.
Thank you so much. So I see a few questions that have come through the chat from Lawrence. Lawrence, I don't know if you want to come off mute and sort of rephrase or combine these questions.
Well, there are a lot of, outside of the county, there are ongoing conversations. The most recent development as far as grants and funding has come by way of the University of Maryland Eastern Shore in partnership with a few other universities. If you go to that link that I provided, you'll see Tuskegee and a few others are involved in that, and that gets involved in investment in human capital for leaders, next generation leaders for agriculture production. So I don't know if there's coordination that's happening with the county, with the University of Maryland to participate with that, because I know there's a greater conversation with like Prince George's County and others. It was brought up with the EANR committee, the Natural Resources Committee, education-wise. So that's another topic. And then there is a push to take agriculture producers and try to get them off of fossil fuels on a national scale, given the 2030 Sustainable Development Goal objectives and some other objectives that have been defined by the federal government based on the Greater Paris Accord and some other things that have been happening as a bigger conversation. I don't know if the county is jumping in on that to create a pathway or a plan and with funding associated with it to assist farmers in going green, if you want to call it green. I know there is funding by the USDA to assist farmers in going organic, but I don't think it addresses the whole fossil fuel usage thing. And I know there's big funding now for the broadband initiative for communications for rural communities. And then the last topic that I threw in there was around the platforms for carbon credits, because I don't think agriculture producers get enough credit for capturing carbon through their operations. Unfortunately, they get too much negative press on how much carbon they generate, but they don't get enough credit from the carbon they capture, especially if you're talking like in my world with controlled environment agriculture, as we are carbon neutral and we are a zero impact environmental impact on the environment, potentially sometimes even in the case of carbon negative for production. So that's a conversation to have a platform and an education process around that platform so that farmers can have a service provided to them for valuation. And that would be another revenue stream for producers getting on the carbon credit market.
Thank you, Lawrence. I see Heather has responded to you in the chat. It looks like she's suggesting Office of Food System Resilience as the best next place to connect about all of these issues. And I really do appreciate you bringing this up, because as you know, the Food Council works across all food system issue areas, including related to agriculture and the environment. So I think it's important to keep these things in mind as we are working with the county government on these shared goals. Heather, anything you'd like to add?
No, I just
Sorry.
It was the Office of Agriculture actually that I think would be a good point of contact for some of these questions specifically, and that the State Food Council is closely connected with the University of Maryland. UMES is a little bit more connected in terms of Shady Grove here at the county level, but trying to keep local partners up to date and also their feedback engaged in some of the academic research projects that they're working on, like the reference in St. Thomas.
Yeah.
The other
say, oh,
sorry, dear. The other thing I wanted to add was about the infrastructure categorization. The Department of Homeland Security does classify agriculture as one of the key critical infrastructures for the country for national security. And so if the on a policy and a regulatory categorization, if there could be something adopted by the county and the state to categorize agriculture as infrastructure, then that would go into some of the consideration for funding, given the infrastructure bill and some other bills that have gone out that make funding available for infrastructure.
Thank you, Tara. Were you going to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to add to Heather that Councilmember Andrew Friedson is particularly vested in those type of issues. So I would say if you were looking for a direct council contact, that you could contact his office, and I'm sure he would engage in those discussions. And our Department of Environmental Protection is also the lead in terms of when it comes to carbon issues. Just coming across my desk, different issue was talking about where we just got a grant from the Federal Highway Administration of like $10 million for focused on electronic vehicles and providing rechargeable stations. So they're kind of like, so whenever you're talking, I'm like, okay, like which DEP thing was I on? So that I could definitely see that being something that would come under their purview. And so a lot of the times we'll take these recommendations from groups like yours, and then the council will work directly with that department to get information on like what they're doing, how familiar they are with this issue, how do we prioritize this, and is this something that, you know, it's the council's role to jump into. And sometimes we kind of split things as Heather's office is under the county executive. So is it more of the purview of the county executive, and in terms of coordinating with him and his office in terms of maybe what their focus is for the department? So, and so there's multiple ways, I think, of kind of, you know, trying to focus on these issues and bringing them to a priority for the council and the executive's office.
Thank you. I want to note that Tom has his hand up. Thank you, Tom. I see Massa's question in the chat, which I will get to next. And if you have additional questions, feel free to raise your hand or drop them in the chat, and I will go in order. So, Tom.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, and some of you probably heard this on NPR yesterday, there was an interview on 1A about ultra-processed foods. A guy has just published a book called something like Ultra-Processed People, and the story behind the food that isn't food. And then in today's Washington Post, or was it yesterday's Washington Post, there was an article, headline was, why are many ultra-processed foods so unhealthy? A lot of times when we talk about food, and this is really sort of directed at Heather, it's almost as if food is food. You know, it's like, how can we get more food to people who need food? And I guess these two experiences I've had just in the last 24 hours are dramatizing for me that food is not just food. I mean, there's good food and there's bad food. And apparently like 65% of the calories that we consume in the United States is bad food. It's ultra-processed stuff, artificial flavorings, designed to make us addicted to consumption of more calories, designed to make it very quickly digested so we can get it on the run, but that also creates a kind of endorphin hit that makes us addicted to those particular types of food. The thing in the Washington Post today talked about how ultra-processed food has been almost pre-digested, you know, so that it's so easily digested and goes right to the bloodstream, causes this spike. So I'm just wondering, Heather, you know, as you think about your office and the important new work that you're doing, and this is controversial because look, the USDA created the bad food system we have. So in a way, you're going up against some pretty big entities when you say, not all the food that we're providing to people is good food. And we need to find a way to focus on getting higher quality food and more nutritious food to people.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tom. You know, I think that really gets at the heart of everything that the OFSR is designed to work on. And I guess I would say first, in terms of food security, I think you've seen a real commitment by the county to invest in produce access and local product, local farm product access through our food assistance network. Pre-COVID, there were significant efforts already in terms of building nutrition education as a component of food assistance and food security programs. And there was, even during the pandemic, a greater focus on medically tailored diets and ensuring that nutrition was a key component of the assistance that people were receiving during the public health crisis. So, you know, I think those have always been very much on the mind and is the intention of not siloing our work around understanding nutrition from the work we're doing to address food insecurity in the community, which is not separate from the work we're doing to support critical food producers in our community like you, who are, crafting really critical nutritional tools for our residents. And how do we build economic accessibility of that food and recognize that we need to grow that volume to be more resilient in the future for everybody, regardless of financial accessibility of those products. So I think it's looking at all of those things at the same time without our brains exploding, like how do we really keep all of those things in mind? And a big part of what I see my work is doing is ensuring that the values that we all have committed to as professionals in the space, and that the county executive and our county leaders have adopted, in their work, are truly driving the way we invest our resources, and that the way that we run our programs. And if the county is operating food service facilities, how are we ensure that those investments are aligned with the things that we want to see for our bodies, for our residents, for our economy, and for the longevity of all those things. So that's a lot of words right now, but I think it's also just an important commitment that these are things that are very much a priority of the county executives and councils, and that this is why they've created this office, to be intentionally looking at all those things at once. And there, hopefully
Thank you, Heather. I just wanted to flag the issue, and I know that you and many others are trying to push the needle in the right direction. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And it is slow work, and I recognize and appreciate the questions around infrastructure, because all of these things have to kind of scale in alignment with each other. We can't increase procurement too much if we don't have the processing and the distribution and the aggregation infrastructure and the labor market and all of those pieces there. Well, it's one thing to have the public dollars to invest in this work. It's another thing to have the things in place to be able to invest in. And I think those are the things that, and the processes in place that allow us to do that work. I know there were a couple of questions, Michelle, in the chat, kind of more operational. Would you like Tara and I to respond to those, or?
Yeah, that would be great. And I just want to flag for folks that since the discussion is going over the allotted time, which is usually what we intend to happen, we welcome you to drop your organizational updates into the chat, and we're happy to include those in the notes after the call. So Heather, it looks like we have a sort of process related question from Massa in the chat. If you could respond to the question about special appropriations and what they'll look like this year.
Yeah, Tara, do you want me to start and then you can add?
Yeah, that's probably a more me question. So once the budget is approved, throughout the year, the council can undertake supplemental or special appropriations if they're needed or required by the department. During COVID, there was a lot of special appropriations that happened because more funding was needed here, and there, and everywhere. But I will say, per normal, supplemental and special appropriations are usually tied to grant funding. So that means we got a grant, we need to make sure we add the funding to the budget to allow whichever department to use it. Special appropriations are requests from the county executive that come through. So they have to be driven by the county executive's office. Supplemental and special, they have to be driven by the county executive's office, and then they come over to the county council for further discussion. What really is the determining factor of an appropriation really being approved or discussed in general is if it's a grant. If it's a grant funding, then we usually just push it through. There's conversation about what the grant will do, the terms of the grant, who's the intended party, is there any council savings or county tax supported savings that are going to happen because we have this grant? And so usually, it gets approved. For special appropriations, especially the ones that have been coming over lately, which are in the million plus, the deciding factor is really if the council has the money. Or if the council can identify the money, because they go through this whole owner's budget process to set the budget. So when the budget so when the budget is approved, the intent of the council is that's your funding for all of the next year. So usually there's a special circumstance in which an organization is saying they won't be able to no longer provide the service, or there is an unexpected increase because something happening within the county. Let's even say like monkeypox, for example, when there's I'll take the reproductive health issue that happened last year. The council did a supplemental because they wanted to show their support and for those who needed those services. So they added $1 million and a special appropriation to start a grants program. So special appropriations, they happen. I'm not saying they're frowned upon, but really the council, during COVID, we were doing a lot of them. Outside of COVID, they will be scrutinized a lot more because an additional 2 million, 3 million, 4 million coming over is that, the council may say, hey, we might just have to limit the program this year, or, where is this funding coming from? A lot of the times too, with special and supplemental, if there's just a shifting of money, so sometimes the county executive's recommendation will say, hey, we're not going to use this money for this, so we're going to use savings. And that is usually helpful because the council doesn't have to appropriate new funds from their reserves, from county reserves. And so if they're saying, hey, so we're going to switch 2 million from this one to this one, then they'll say, the council will say, okay, why aren't we using it over there? Because that's what we approved it for. That conversation, that's approved. So usually it's there's more discussion when it's new money, when they're going to have to dip into county reserves, and when there's appropriation after appropriation. If you do 20 million in appropriations for HHS, that was $20 million I'm budgeted for. So it is so this process for FY24 of special appropriations and supplementals will probably go back to what it looked like pre-COVID, where there's scrutiny on what is added and really looking at, especially the things that are tax supported dollars. As council is already thinking about FY25, I think they're pretty strongly committed to not increasing property taxes again. I won't speak for them, but this was FY24 was the first year that they did it in a number of years. So I doubt if that'll happen again. So I think they're really going to get very strategic about appropriations that are done within the year that are outside of grant funding.
Thank you, and thanks for helping us understand the new normal post ARPA funds and other federal investments. I know we're running out of time, but I want to flag Jackie DiCarlo's question in the chat to see if we can get a quick response from both Heather and Tara on their perspectives on how the Office of Food System Resilience focus on investments will relate to Tara's explanation of the process grants office. The process is within the grants office, and can you speak to how the CE's budget process develops and the timelines?
Yeah, so I can speak quickly about my understanding, but I think it's important always to underscore that none of this work happens in a vacuum, and it's also a period of tremendous transition in the post, emergency response landscape. And so a lot of what will happen over the next year to year and a half is the county building on those lessons learned to understand how do we continue to do this work in a sustainable way and lean more heavily on data to understand where are there service gaps, where are residents being, potentially over-supported, how can we align services in ways that both protect the dignity of the service experience for residents and the efficiency of services that they're receiving, so that we're not working on food over here and housing assistance or energy assistance or, any of these things separately. And so a big piece of that is how can we just be more efficient? And that will require shifting, but shifting takes time. And so that also is, I think, another factor in a special appropriation consideration is that we are always stuck in this cycle of a year-to-year budget, which makes it very difficult to take a step back and do analytical and strategic thinking about what should this look like in the long run and allow our community to adapt and be an effective partner in that work too. So that's just sharing, what this next year and a half will look like. And at some, hopefully that will allow us to set up processes that in FY25 will make things much more routine. So the same thing is happening with the Office of Grants Management, that there is a transition from the community grants process, which has been on hold for a number of years, but really was requiring the community, and the Food Council had played a big role in this, to compare nonprofit proposals that were totally different, that were not aligned. It was, you were looking at a housing program next to a food program, next to a farming program. It just was not something that was easy. So this is allowing the county to be more strategic and saying, here is an issue area that we would like to invest in community work, and we will set up more flexible and competitive processes for creative thinking and opportunities to partner with the community in that work. So I think this bridge funding and the transition is allowing organizations to keep doing the great work that they're doing while the county shifts some of the ways that it spends its money in partnership with nonprofits. And so some of those you'll see are aligned. They're not specifically about food, but food could be a component of those priorities of those competitive grant processes. And then the county executives, the budget comes out in March, but really it's pretty final by January. Really in October of this year is when we're going to need to have a lot of solid ideas about what things will look like in a year and a half. And we know in that amount of time, 1,000 different unpredictable things may happen, and the economy is also very difficult to predict, and what that will mean both for residents, nonprofits, and county revenues. So I think it's just asking everybody to be patient and understand that, I think there's a lot of uncertainty, but in order to do things in improved and enhanced ways, it requires a period of transition.
Thank you, Heather. Jackie, I saw you came off video. Any follow-up questions? Okay. And I want to thank everyone for joining us and sharing their time with us today. This has been a wonderful group. We really appreciate you sharing your questions and engaging with our speakers. Thank you especially to Heather and Tara for sharing your time with us. We know your time's valuable, and we really appreciate you making the time to help walk us through these significant changes and significant opportunities for our county as we work together to support our food system. So thanks everyone for staying on a couple minutes late. We'll be sure to share the notes and recording in a few days to a week, given the holiday. I hope everyone has a wonderful upcoming holiday weekend, and we'll see you next month featuring Councilmember Kate Stewart. Kate Stewart will be joining us next month, fourth Wednesday of the month from 1 to 2. So we hope to see you there. Thanks everyone.